So I want today to talk to you about my new book, On a Barbarous Coast. Because we've done something quite new here, quite unique I think in Australian writing that hasn't really been done before. So the basic premise of the book is that when the Endeavour ship goes up the east coast of Australia in 1770, when it hits the Barrier Reef, most people know the story that the Endeavour hit the Barrier Reef and it was a lucky thing that they were able to save it and sail on. In our story, it's a very stormy night and the ship sinks. And about 50% of the ship's crew die straight off in the wreck. A smaller number straggle ashore. And so here's the setup. So we have the survivors, they've lost their ship. Captain Cook is comatose. A spar has fallen on his head, they've carried him ashore comatose. None of the other officers have survived. So we've got the crew with no leadership, the hierarchy's all gone. What do they start doing? And it gets a bit like Lord of the Flies, I guess you might think, in terms of what's happened to the survivors. So we have the Marines, they want to act like Marines, they want to build a fort and defend themselves from the hostile natives they fear might be there to attack them. The sailors want to repair the longboat and sail away, act like sailors. And the gentlemen and the scientists want to act a bit more like naturalists and scientists of the era and try and understand the land and the people. So the title of the book, On a Barbarous Coast, is used with a sense of satire. It's actually a line from Sidney Parkinson, who was the artist on board the Endeavour. And he wrote of their time when they struck the reef in real life. About 11, the ship struck upon the rocks and remained immovable. We were at this period many thousand leagues from our native land, which we had left upward of 2 years, and on a barbarous coast, where if the ship had been wrecked and we had escaped the perils of the sea, we should have fallen into the rapacious hands of savages. And that reflects the feeling the crew had. They were really worried about the natives of New Holland, as they called it at the time. But in our telling, because we have the white fellow and the black fellow telling, we give for the first time not just the image of the ship looking to the shore, but the shore looking to the ship. And my Indigenous colleague, Harold Ludwick, he tells the story from the Indigenous point of view, what they see of these white people coming ashore. And at first, they presume the question is, are these people spirits? Have they come from the east, as is in our legends, that our elders have gone to the west when they die and will come back from the east? So maybe these people are spirits. But they don't act like spirits. They don't seem to understand the law of the land. They don't know where food is. What's happening here? So we have these two streams happening, a white fella stream, the black fella stream. And as the story goes on, we bring them together to try and converge these two parts of the story. And that's one of the big goals of the book. We want to look at reimagining not just what if Captain Cook's story, but what if Australia's history had started off on a different foot? How would black and white relations be in Australia today if in the early days, right from the earliest, the white people who had arrived had a much deeper understanding of black Australia and black Australians had a much deeper understanding of white Australians? Imagine a second contact. What happens when a ship arrives and they're met by Indigenous people who can speak a bit of their language, who understand the way Europeans think about the land, think about capture, think about conquest and so on. How different things would have turned out in those days. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Now, I can't speak entirely for my co-author Harold, but I can tell you some of the techniques he's used in the book, and hopefully you'll be able to find those. And if we get Harold to post a video, you'll get his point of view on it. But we use as much of the language we can. So with his point of view, he takes the form of a young boy, Gargil, which means hawk in the language of the Gugu Imita people around Cooktown. And he's an inquisitive young man. And as an inquisitive young man, he's watching these white strangers, these settlers, these spirits, and trying to come close to understand them. He's yet to be initiated, so he's a different perspective than many of the elders might have. And on the white side, or the European side, we've also found a young boy looking through history, and that was actually a Tahitian boy. So Cook, when he was in Tahiti, he took a holy man called Tupaia with him as a navigator, and he had a young servant with him called Taheto. And so in our book, they're the two that form the bond of which these two vast cultures start coming to understand each other. We also have a couple of other points of irony, because while the European survivors are worried, fearfully worried about the Indigenous people of the land, the savages as they think them, it's actually their own people they have to most fear, because the violence when it comes between them. And if anything, the indigenous people of this land prove to be kind and find ways to try and help them as they see them starving and as the people fracture and as the tribal groupings amongst the Europeans start forming. We've tried to make it as close to actual history as is possible. So let me read an excerpt from the book On a Barbarous Coast for you. This is from the introduction of the book. The wreck. A lesser man would have felt it was his own dreams and ambitions that struck the reef, and the shuddering blow of it was his future splintering apart, rather than the beams of our ship. And I, for one, believed we were well and truly stuffed, knew it as a certainty that many of us would be dead before daybreak. But our great captain showed not a moment of doubt that he would save us, as if the strength of his determination alone would hold the ship together, even if it took 3 days of pumping and straining at the anchor ropes and casting our ballast and heavy cargo overboard, as if he had seen how it would be written, and he would, through his own strength and determination, hold us afloat to limp to shore, where our injured vessel could be hauled up onto the bank to be repaired. And there are some nights when the moon is bright across the reefs and the strong southerly winds swirl together my memories and my longings, that I almost believe that is exactly how things played out, that we saved every man jack of the crew and sailed back to England. Like me. Leaving no ruins nor fortifications behind us, no footsteps disappearing away into the wilds, no graves of our dead, no bones left whitening in the grass. For he didn't save us, did he? And to quote the good book, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Perhaps if it had been a clearer night, or if the winds and seas had been calmer, if the reef had been a little lower under the choppy waves, if we had not been dismasted, if our captain had not been struck by a falling spar, if his confidence in his destiny had been tempered a little by caution. Plainly I was made of a different metal than our great captain, for I could feel it as an immutable truth that our hour of doom was upon us. That great floating world of ours, of stout beams and strong wooden pegs, bound with tarred rope and canvas and protected by tall sides with heavy cannons, it all meant nothing when the reef effortlessly ripped our bottom out. Sharp rocks and coral splintered the wood with a jolt that ran through the whole ship and through every man on board. Each of us felt it was our own bones that were splintering, our sternums being ripped open and our hearts exposed to the sharp slashing reef below. That's what it felt like, that moment of terror when we knew what had happened. Within a moment of striking, every man and youngster aboard was awake, those in their hammocks lifting their heads and staring at each other. What was that? Did I dream that? Was it one of the many nightmares that haunt each sailor? There were so many ways to die far from home that could haunt you. Drowning, falling from the rigging, diseases, wild natives, heat stroke, cold, just closing your eyes one night and drifting into an endless sleep. That question on waking seemed to last so long, though it was really just an instant between the safety of the old world and the chaos of the new. Then we heard the shouts of alarm, heard the ship's bell ring, and everyone knew for certain. Before we even tumbled from our hammocks to find the deck tilting at an unnatural angle beneath us, everything out of kilter. We were stuffed. I knew it. I knew the timbers beneath us were worn and aged, worm-riddled probably. I'd heard the officers talking. The ship was not even in a fit state to try and return to England via the Horn. We were headed to Batavia for a refit. Another dream now. I made my way forward to the midshipman's sleeping space outside the officer's cabin, through the cursing marines, into the tumble of men and hammocks in the mess deck. Some were trying to stow their hammocks, some were grabbing gear, others were trying to push their way through the melee of men to get to their posts. "Make way!" I shouted, as if being a midshipman gave me vast authority over them, as if anyone was actually listening to me. Voices and fingers plucked at me as I passed. "What has happened? Have we struck? Is it serious?" All questions and no answers. I made my way through the press of men trying to climb up onto deck, still calling, "Make way!" to no effect. I had to fight my way up the ladder onto the deck, and the first thing I saw was our great captain, standing on the aft deck in his nightshirt and taking in the situation, calm and in control, surrounded by his lackeys who stared at him in foolish devotion, but believed that no matter what danger we were in, he would save us, like he might still the storm clouds, like he might part the waves for us, like he might walk on water and pull the very ship free if he chose. Lobcocks and idiots. So a few more things about the background of the story. I've long been interested in Captain Cook and have travelled to many places Captain Cook had been to, but there was nothing that captured me quite so much as Cooktown. Now, if you've never been up to Cooktown, right up the far north of Cape York, quite close to Cape York, the tip of it, Captain Cook came ashore there and was there for 48 days. Now, the Endeavour, when it went to Botany Bay, it was there for about a week. But Botany Bay gets all the attention, all the interest. Cooktown, by comparison, they were there 48 days and they had much deeper interactions with the natives. They had some hostilities with them. Things almost came to a clash at one stage when Cook and his men took too many turtles from the ocean. And for the natives, the Guguimida people, the indigenous people of Cooktown area, that was their resources, and they were taking turtles at a time when you shouldn't take turtles. Not that many, to protect them so they'd be able to have more turtles later on, particularly female turtles. And that led to an altercation between the indigenous peoples and the Europeans. But that altercation was saved when a little old man came out with a broken-tipped spear, and he held that up as a peace gesture, and the Europeans and the indigenous people sat down and they parleyed and they reconciled their differences. So it's not widely known, but that was the first case of reconciliation in Australia. A very important moment in Cooktown's history, a very important part of Australia's history that we should all know much more about. And that was one of the things that made me think there's a lot more that happened up here that I think more Australians should know. And added on to that, my what-if story, the what-if telling of it, that me and Harold then telling the story, it made for a much deeper and authentic telling, I believe. And a book I hope that many Australians will read. I'll get a better understanding of Indigenous perspectives, a better understanding of European perspectives, and perhaps to answer that big question that we hope the book poses. What if?